All right. All right. Good morning. Today is May 11th, and I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Concord Municipal Light Board meeting. I just want to acknowledge Alice actually is out in Arizona being a proper grandparent, and I'm sure she's probably up with us in spirit, but she's probably got other things to occupy her today. So she won't be with us. In terms of our next meeting is June 8th. I don't know if anyone have any concerns with next month's meeting, June 8th. No. Okay, good. So June 8th is our next meeting, and followed by July 13th and August 10th upcoming meetings. So in terms of minutes, I know Gordon, thank you. You sent around and distributed the meetings from February 9th. Feedback was received, and I don't know if you got any additional feedback, but are we in a position to approve those minutes? Do people have additional comments?
I got one additional comment last night from Pam asking to delete a region. I actually haven't, I'm not sure exactly what part of it. Pam, what did you want to delete?
Oh, I don't know. I was, you directly quoted me on something where I had said I supported the rest of the board, and then you added a direct quote where I said something like, you know, this seems like a good way to go strategically into the future or something. And I just had two issues with it, which are minor, and if you want to ignore them, that's fine. One is that I don't know, I didn't go back to the recording and see exactly what a quote is. A real quote. I believe you must have taken it from the recording. But secondly, it added no value, and I am trying to model perhaps like not adding things that are not really adding value to the content of our minutes. And so I suggested that be deleted.
Okay, I think that I see something here with, it says Ms. Hill voiced agreement with the other board members, and then crossed out is members concluding her remarks with, I think, the notion of a strategic approach with transitioning as we get more data, as we add in more data points is very wise way to look at all of this. So we'll drop that.
Yeah, I have no objection to it. I just think that it's totally unnecessary, and it was a direct quote, which makes me nervous. So anyway, that's
Okay.
that. I don't think it's a big deal, and I had mentioned it earlier. You just didn't catch it, I guess. And I appreciate your diligence with this, Gordon.
Thank you. So if with what we're talking about here is the same draft that I sent out to everybody, just deleting that one. If people are, would people be willing to approve the minutes as modified?
I would be. Okay.
Yeah.
So with that, then I'll entertain a motion with approving the minutes with striking that one sentence that we've just discussed and referred to. Take a motion.
I suggest we approve the minutes. I'm sorry, I forget the date.
February 9th.
February 9th. I suggest we approve the minutes of February 9th with the agreed upon edits.
Is there a second?
Second.
I second.
All right, Pam. All right, so a roll call. Brian?
Aye.
Pam?
Yes.
Gordon?
Yes.
And Wendy approves as well. So thank you all.
So I have one other item, Wendy, about minutes, and that is that I believe that Karen just sent another set to me yesterday. So the question is how to wrap this up. And I'm not sure how many minutes are outstanding. It's probably all of May. So this is a February one, and I think we've gotten one since then. We had two meetings in April.
March. We had 2 in March and 2 in April. So those
that's at least, so that's 4, maybe the one that, subtracting out the one that just came yesterday. That would be, well, anyway, it's like as many as 4 that occurred when I was nominally the clerk.
Right.
Okay, so here's what I'll offer the board to Pam. I don't want to dump this backlog on you, Pam. So, and I'm still meeting weekly. on the fiber task force. So I still have that obligation and we haven't finished our document. So I'm actually still pretty heavily loaded. That hasn't ended yet, but I expect that should end within the next few weeks. And then I can, so here's my offer. I'm assuming that my obligation for the fiber task force is going to end in May. I'll give you my time in June so that I'm willing to do what I did last night and last week. That is, Karen can send me drafts. I'll review them, edit them, and send them out up until the next meeting. And then then I'll pass the torch to somebody else. So Karen, if you can get all 4 of those done, then that'll be a much less of a load on Pamela.
Gordon, thank you for that. Also, that gives us time to maybe rethink the way we do this, because I've conveyed to both Brian and Wendy that I hate to put it this way, but the basis for my agreeing to be clerk is that we do some substantial changing to the way this works because of the load on the board that should be devoted to other things, and the expectation in the way the arrangement went that there be the minutes be prepared by the light plant staff. I really appreciate. I'm not criticizing light plant staff at all. I think they've been great, but I think we need to make some substantial changes here, and that needs to happen. So I trust that that's supported by Brian and Dave Wood. And Dave, I'm happy to talk to you about it in the next month or so.
Yeah, and as I said at the last meeting, we're going to have you in. I think we'll coordinate it so Brian's in as well as chair, assuming you guys vote him through. But I think that's important because I know you have expectations and we have expectations and everyone has a role. So we want to make sure we're on the same page.
Absolutely. It makes us Brian, Dave, once the vote is taken, whenever you're ready with Brian and me to meet on this, but it's important that it's understood on the record that I don't intend to do the kind of spend the time on this that perhaps others have in the past.
Well, and we also have to get out from underneath this backlog. I mean,
Right.
we have an obligation to the public in terms of transparency, and I'm leaving, so I guess my opinion doesn't matter, but I don't really care as much about whether or not they're properly formatted as much as whether or not we get them up and dealt with and out of the way. And we've been doing that on like the fiber task force. We've been doing them ourselves. They're not very good. Like they're not polished,
Yeah,
but we get them done that week.
So Gordon, I think what Pam is talking about is she wants to establish a very streamlined and understood output for these minutes, such that they don't take as much time for staff to prepare, that they meet the handbook's guidelines, and that we make this process more efficient. So I think the meeting that we sit down and go through the details will be great. I think when Pam and I and Dave sit down and do this with Karen and say, this is what the handbook says we have to do. Here's what we're looking for simple summary minutes, and we'll go from there.
I disagree a little bit. I think the key is to get the board member to do less, the staff to do more, and for us to do what was written in the agreement with the board that I guess Chris Whalen did, and to make sure that the staff understands that. I don't think the handbook is governing in this. It's a suggestion, and I know that other committees I've been on, especially where there have been large organizations involved, like there's a staff of the organization, like the FinCom, which I was on. That work is not done by members of the committee. I don't think we should spend time on this today, but I want to be very clear that I'm not talking about following the handbook. I'm talking about changing the way the workload and the obligations of all members of this operation. So I think working with Brian and Dave will be great, and I'm really grateful to the staff. I'm not disparaging the staff.
Thank you.
So I think we've had a lot of conversation on that, Pam. You've gone on record for what you're looking for. So I think offline is the best way to handle that. Gordon, thank you for your volunteering to continue. I was going to suggest that I thought Pam had volunteered to do those March minutes. If you are willing to, spend it, let's say the end of May, right? Because that's actually, I think, when your tenure really ends at the end of the month. So
Sure.
I agree that Karen can draft those minutes and you can circulate them. That would be fantastic. And really appreciate your time and commitment to doing that very much so. And I guess on that note, I just also want to acknowledge, Gordon, that this is your last meeting. And I want to thank you for all your contributions. I'll say that when I came a new member, you were sort of instrumental to me on learning the ropes of the board. And you've made a lot of contributions, including improving some of the formats and the acronyms, et cetera, in our minutes. We certainly accomplished a lot in the last 6 years or so, including, several public meetings that we've had informing citizens on rates. You've been a staunch advocate of making sure there's fairness in our rates, and really appreciate your continuing to be vocal about that. But a lot to be accomplished. And again, this year in particular, that fiber completion task force has been, I know, a huge time commitment. So again, appreciate your support for that. And we're going to look forward to that report. Maybe you'll come back for our follow-up on that meeting.
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor to be associated with the light plant, founded in 1895. That's around the time my grandfather was born. It's a fantastic organization. You guys all do great work. So thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. The other sort of, I have a topic for sort of future business, which Amanda Cohn reminded me that for both the Climate Action Board and the CSAT Committee, each of those committees should have one representative that's recommended by this board. We won't discuss this today, but I think in a future meeting, we should have additional discussion around that in terms of supporting those committees as they're turning over staff on their committees. So future topic on that. And then obviously I've moved into sort of a chairs update. The next topic in the chairs update, as we all know, at town meeting, as we all expected, Article 38 passed. And so we need to decide our next steps in supporting Article 38. And this was the request to create a plan with a schedule by the end of the year around completing a plan to install in-town solar under the guidelines of the climate action, as identified in the climate action plan. I think as a board, we talked about how challenging this could be given all the work that is on the board's plate this year. And so we've also talked about whether we should hire a consultant to help get some of this work done and help assess the ability to actually to at least initiate this work. I don't know that we're going to get it all done, but we want to take a very thoughtful and planned approach to this because it's more important to get it done right. But we need to start. So want to outreach to the board and get your thoughts on next steps. Do we think a consultant is the right way to initiate this process? I think we need additional support. I'm very concerned about the staff as well. Brian?
Yeah, I think that we do need a third party. I think we need to establish agreed upon facts, and a third party does that well. And I think what is being asked in this and what really we should develop as a solar policy are different things. And I think that the ask is very narrow and focused, and I think we should have broader discussions, but the timeline is my biggest concern. And so I think as at the next meeting, we should have this as agenda item. We should define the scope of work we need to do to accomplish this in good detail, such that we can set up any consultant that we hire to really make the best product by the end of the year, which is the deadline. And then we'll see how that goes. But I think I'll be going to the select board or FinCom, possibly asking for an extension, but I want to give good progress that we've done to date before I make that request, so that we can really set a good report and a good schedule and try to accomplish that goal.
And to that point, Brian,
Sorry.
we've engaged E&E already in terms of the logistical pieces of it. And I have a slide deck from them that I could share. It's not gonna make a lot of sense to you guys without explanation from E&E. And we can schedule them to be at a board meeting when ready. But they've looked at the feedback options in terms of if we overproduce and are going back into the ISO market. So we have at least a guide plan on how we'd have to go about that.
Okay, I have some concerns about selecting the consultant so quickly, but
It's not selecting consultant, it's looking at the logistics, that's all it was.
okay, all right, then that's fine. Yeah.
Pam?
Just two things. One, and this is for future discussion, but I think jumping to a consultant is an interesting path. I also think maybe in addition or instead, we should invite Dave to suggest increases in permanent staffing for the light plant, because everybody knows that the responsibilities of the light plant have increased dramatically. Article 51, this article, broadband, all of that. You can't. I don't know what the growth of the light plant has been, Dave, but I think it should be commensurate with the expectations that the town has put on you, and the town can't approve articles without understanding that there are costs to that. As there are costs to what has happened to our climate. So I just invite you, Dave, I don't know how you want to proceed with this, but I think it's not a question of just a consultant, which may be tossing, money to the winds, but rather increasing the base of your operation if you believe it's necessary. So I just invite you to think a lot about that and give us some guidance on what we can do to face reality here. If the town is really serious, as it has expressed its seriousness at town meeting, it's got to understand that there are costs, and those costs are commensurate with climate change and the issues that it presents to us as a species, actually. So that's that. Second thing is, I just want to confirm, Brian, you're not going to be are you going to the select board with requests without going through the board?
No, definitely not.
Okay,
So I want
great.
us to get the process started, but I'm simply looking at the request and the time given, and it's clear that there's not enough time. But I don't want to go in front of the select board without fully vetting what we're doing, who we're working with, and how long we as a group feel that it will take to really do a good report and schedule. So at that point, I may go to the select board and ask for more time, but let's do those steps first.
Absolutely. I just wasn't clear on the way you framed that. Wasn't clear to me. So great, thank you.
Getting a little ahead of ourselves, but so in terms of next steps, we obviously will have a meeting next month where we can have more focused discussion. Dave can give some feedback. We can hear from E&E. Is there anything we do between now and next month in terms of prepping for next month? And Dave, maybe it's the chair can meet offline with you and talk about some of these issues and come back next month. Makes
Yeah, that
sense.
makes a lot of sense.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I think at our next meeting, we need to really have all the discussions about what are we doing, what's the boundaries of what we're going to work on.
Right. Yep. Okay, thank you. And thank you, Pam, for your comments. Those aren't new ideas in terms of staff resources. The board spoke about that before. So it'll be a good follow-up discussion next month as well. Okay.
Great. Thanks.
All right. So let's move on. Who is that? Joe Ripa? Yep. Sorry, the sun's there. Just quick comment. Joe, you're on mute.
Comment?
Quickly. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed that.
No, you had your hand raised, so I didn't know if you had a quick comment.
Oh, no, I didn't. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right.
Maybe, I guess the sun looks like it.
All
Oh,
right.
yeah, I think Pamela maybe.
Me.
So Pamela Hill also.
Oh.
Yeah, you got, everyone's hands are up, so let's, I'd like to actually hold off comments and move forward on our agenda. So let's hold comments till the end. Sorry for my indulging that temporarily. So I want to move on the agenda. We have an election of officers that needs to take place. We discussed last month and earlier months that I've nominated, or I have offered that Brian become chair of the light board and that Pam would become clerk. Obviously obvious based on our comments. So need to take any comments on that? So that recommendation? No. Okay. We need to take an official vote on those new elected officers, and I would entertain a motion to support that. I don't know.
So
Brian.
I move to nominate Brian as the chair of the light board.
And Pam as clerk, or just Brian as,
Oh, I'm sorry, we do both, and Pam as clerk.
okay. And I would,
You can go ahead and second, Wendy, because you're not
okay, I
on.
was gonna say, I will second Brian as chair and Pam as clerk. Now we'll take a roll call. Gordon,
Yes,
Wendy's yes, Brian,
Yes.
and Pam.
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right, well, thank you all. Appreciate that. A lot of discussion there. So with this official change in election of officers, I actually want to take this time and we will now switch roles and Brian will become chair and manage the remainder of this agenda. With
Oh,
that-
and just thank you very much, Wendy, for serving as chair twice now. So thank you.
Yeah, I think we owe you a lot of thanks for this, and we certainly helped me get into it. Thanks, Wendy.
Oh, got a lot on our plate. I'm not going anyplace, at least. for the next
I
place. So,
also want to say a thank you to Gordon for being clerk.
Yes.
You know, he's filled in many times and he's done that role, and I don't think anyone really likes having that role, but he did it well.
I'd agree with all of that.
Yes.
Thank you. And
All right.
also, well, but I did get some help. I kind of got a little overwhelmed there in the spring. So thanks for stepping up. Particularly Alice filled in a number of times. So appreciate that.
Excellent. So I'm going to move us along and we'll go to the director's update. Dave?
Thanks, Brian. First, Gordon, thank you for 6 years. Really appreciate it. And Wendy, thanks for being the chair for the last year. So in terms of my update, CMLP staff and Amanda, our sustainability director, worked together to coordinate the inclusion of electric vehicles in the Patriots Day Parade. So we had the Tesla from the police department. There was an ID4 and Hyundai Kona, and it was well received by the community. A lot of feedback, comments of how quiet they are, things of that nature. So that was pretty nice to hear. Concord staffs and volunteers promoted CMLP's energy management rebates and services at the Cooler Concord Climate Festival and at town meeting. And we'll be doing the same at 2 more events in May, and also tabling at the Spring into West Concord Junction event on May 21st. So we're getting some stuff out there and getting good feedback. An article featuring CMLP's heating and cooling coaching services was published in April across all of USA Today Network's websites in Massachusetts. So that was a pretty big deal. It was in 15 papers, and it appeared in the Concord Journal as well. You may recall we had that squirrel damage the switchgear at Emerson Hospital. We finally received all the parts, and we're working with the hospital and scheduling outage so we can isolate the area that's damaged so that we can make the necessary repairs. We're tentatively scheduled for May 17th and 18th for those repairs. So we're excited to finally have the parts and looking forward to getting that finished up. advanced metering system. The RFP review team completed in-person presentations. And we concluded that 2 of the vendors were preferred, and our consultants checking references on that. Once that's complete, we'll go into the next step, which would be contract negotiations. So again, moving on, we're a little bit behind on the timeline, but I think it's more important to get it right than, to push it along just to push it along. We recently launched a double pole survey, and double poles are poles that are replaced, and we still have stuff attached to them, other utilities. And so you have 2 poles in one location, it's an eyesore. And so we started that. In the first week, we identified over 70 poles that have multiple utilities on them. So we're coordinating that information, compiling it, and we'll get it out to the utilities so they can transfer their facilities, and we can get the pole removed and back to a single pole. So that's a pretty hot topic that happens, every few years we do it. And we've worked in the West Concord area so far. We're going to continue in the town. Brian, you have a question?
Yeah, with that double pole survey, does it also include areas that we've undergrounded where Verizon may still have their wire on one pole where the pole is unnecessary?
No, that's a separate topic, but
Similar.
Yeah, it's a similar issue, but it's different because they don't have the money to convert their stuff. So we're really talking about transferring from one pole to a new pole and then moving the old pole.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
I only have it in my report because it becomes a hot topic and it gets brought to the select board every 5 or 6 years. And so we're trying to be proactive and get these double poles taken care of prior to it being a big issue. Tree trimming, we're currently working with a third party to review and update our RFP specifications. The plan is to get those updated and to issue an RFP with the intent of starting tree trimming in mid to late fall. Typically, we trim sections of the town. We don't do the whole town at one time. We've done it in thirds. We've done it in halves. And so we're looking at what percentage we want to do this year and kind of evaluating the areas that are in the need the most for trimming. So that'll be coming, and that was a budgeted item. We interviewed an applicant for grade 1 line worker last week. We completed references, and we're hoping to make an offer this week. So hopefully that goes well. In terms of the middle school solar project, we're working with Solar Design Associates on project scope and deliverables. We've asked SDA to include financial analysis for different ownership funding models, such as a PPA, CMLP ownership, community solar, and other potential models. So we're waiting to get that information back. Once we get that back, we'll be able to establish a project timeline. And we'll have more to report on that. And that's my update.
Dave?
Yep.
Just curious on the middle school, is the scope going to include like alternative levels of solar installation? That is to say, solar that's just on the roofs of certain things, solar that's constructed in parking lots, solar that may be in additional space, or is it just going to be on top of the roof or whatever?
So in the feasibility design stage, we did a maximum output of the entire facility. So if you recall in a meeting, I talked about canopies, rooftop, and when that was done, that hadn't taken into account HVAC on the roof and things of that nature. So I think it's going to be, all of that's going to be included, canopies and rooftop.
And canopy and rooftop and any additional in available areas or?
I really think those are the only 2 options. Ground mounted, there's not really any location to do ground mounted. So the 2 options are canopy and roof.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
and Alice at our last meeting offered to kind of spearhead the board's knowledge on that. I want to make sure that we check in with the process going along with the middle school to ensure that the mechanicals on the roof are positioned well for maximizing the solar value. Making sure that those, VFRs are placed to the north end of the roof. That may make the runs for those HVAC systems longer, but that needs to be voiced at this point in the process. But that's about the only thing I see as an immediate issue. Everything else, we still do have to have future meetings about how to fund this and to make sure that we have a member that is monitoring to see when we need to engage. But I don't want it to dominate our discussion.
Brian, just did a process point. Last time, did we think we needed to take a vote on Alice, or are we establishing the fact that Alice will be liaison and also setting a sort of critical path for us in terms of when and how we make decisions? The question is, do we need a vote on Alice, or have we done it? Are we there?
I don't know is the answer, but I think right now, what I'd like to do is we've already established at our next meeting that we're going to need to talk about CSECT and CAB and our liaisons. I think we should have a broader discussion about what are all of our liaison responsibilities, who's covering them, and how does this all come together. I think that would be a better discussion, and then we can have a vote that we all agree upon on all of these topics, rather than doing it ad hoc for each discussion.
Okay. Sounds fair enough. Yep.
How does the board feel about that? Straw poll. We generally in agreement that that's a good idea? Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Excellent. Did you get all your questions answered, Pam, about the update?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks. I just wanted to clarify where we were on it. Yep.
Excellent. So I would like to move on to Jason and the broadband update.
Thank you, Brian. So in your packet, I did provide another detailed update, and I'm going to cover this in a minute, but I hope to include even more metrics in future updates. We've had 2 staff members who were out for a good portion of April and early May. I am happy to announce that one of our telecom technicians and his wife welcomed a baby girl on April 11th. Everyone is doing well at this point, and we're wishing them the best. Relating to staffing, we have been conducting telecom director interviews this week, and we plan on scheduling second round interviews for next week. And if everything goes well, hopefully we can announce a candidate at our next light board meeting. Regarding operations, I'm happy to announce that we're having a third-party vendor begin pulling fiber on Monday of next week. And we're going to have them pull fiber for a full 3 days. And then we're going to analyze the impact that had and see how many they've done from our list that we're giving them. A lot of these polls are detail jobs, so we'll have a police detail. They're on busy roads, and we're going to have a Concord broadband personnel, shadowing them to make sure that things go well and assisting to get them done even faster. We're still going to be having our staff do the customer installs and doing the splicing. So this is really just doing the preliminary work to get a new install ready, which is work that usually takes away from the time we can normally get a job done. So this way, these customers will be ready to go, and we should be able to do several customers in a day with this prep work already done instead of 1 or 2 a day per technician. So we're optimistic that this will help us chew through the backlog so that we can, focus on getting new installs done quicker, and we can also then start our marketing efforts. It's hard to market for new customers when you can't install them for months because it's kind of like wasted time and money at that point. So the sooner we get through that backlog, the sooner we can aggressively begin marketing and try to get those new customers and get them installed quickly. We've been working on special projects for the last month. As you know, one of the benefits of having a municipal broadband division is that they can assist with the town and schools, public safety, and other things for the community, assets for the community. Some projects done in the last month were bringing new irrigation electronic control systems to Emerson Park, relocating some of the network operations at White Pond. They've been doing some work down there, and also assisting the schools with connections to Concord Carlisle High School and Alcott that were previously damaged. And this was one of their critical paths for fiber, and something that always impacted the town during town meeting or other times we needed to broadcast. So getting this up will be good. It's been on the list of things to do for quite a while. So we've made a lot of progress on that this month. We did increase our customer count by 17, 4 of which were business customers. The confirmed backlog dipped into the 70s, down from the high 80s, but we do continue to receive interested customers, which is good. People are, they're moving, they're aware of service, they like their service, they want to keep it in their new location. We're getting a lot of, positive feedback from those people who are eager to remain customers even after relocating, or they've heard from the service from the person who sold them the house. I wanted to mention that we're working with Calix, who's the vendor that makes our ONTs, the devices that are actually in customers' homes or businesses, as well as our access systems, that ties that into our network distribution system to upgrade the software and firmware on all of our devices. This is something that hasn't been done in a little while, and something that Dave and I really want to prioritize to increase the stability and security of our network. It is relatively routine maintenance, but it is going to be customer impacting. It's going to be something that's scheduled overnight. They anticipate downtime for any given customer won't exceed 30 minutes, but we'll do our best to cut that down as short as possible. It's not going to be a town-wide outage. This will be kind of like a rolling update system where each card on each device will be updated, and just the customers associated with that card will go down until the card comes back up. Sometimes it's done relatively quickly, just a few minutes. Other times it can take a little while as the system rebuilds the architecture for the ring. But we will work on communicating this heavily. We don't have a date yet, but I just wanted to mention that this is coming. I think it's good to get into a routine maintenance cycle so that people are aware that we're, maintaining this network and that we're not just, leaving it on to run and hope that nothing goes wrong. It's important that we have the latest security updates and stability updates so that we don't have unforeseen issues. It also helps when troubleshooting, because if we're on an old version of something and the vendor needs to assist us with a project, the first question is, well, we need to get you, or why aren't you on the latest version? And so this will help with that. I'm also working with Carol and her team to expand our notification options. Right now we're sending tweets, we're posting on the website, but a lot of customers aren't really looking there. We have outage emails associated with NISC and iView. So we're looking at other ways to communicate those messages to people so they don't end up frustrated if at 3 a.m. their internet goes out for a few minutes during an update. We'd much rather have them be aware of that, and so that they're not being disappointed by the service. I'd like to give a shout out to Jill Moonheron, our GIS analyst for the town. She's helped us refine the backlog mapping capabilities. Previously, we had a form that people would fill out when they were interested, and we could easily map these points, but that's really all we had. What we have now is color-coded points by date of submission, so that we know how long people have been waiting, can help us prioritize certain customers over others. We also have pending connects, open service orders, active customers, available broadband, and we're soon adding roads or streets that need police details. And what this does is in a given week, when we look to schedule that week's work, we can very quickly and easily schedule that work and not have to spend time, just sort of picking names off a list or trying to go first in, first out. We can be a lot more strategic. We think we can get a lot more installs done in the same given time. So thank you to Jill for that. And we're continuing to work on expanding that. I'll even mention that during the outage, the planned outage over at Crosby's due to the car accident on Sudbury Road, we knew we were going to have some lines de-energized, and we're able to use this mapping capability to instantly know exactly how many customers would be affected. When the power went out, it matched perfectly. So it confirmed that our data is good. I'd like to just end my update with a brief moment to discuss the draft report put forward by the Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force. I'd again like to thank all of you, Gordon especially, and all of you on that task force for the hard work that you've done every week for a better part of a year, and the extensive report that was put together. I want to make it clear to the Light Board and everyone here that I will be moving all of these recommendations forward in some capacity. I have a planned, or I've placed a summary list of all of these recommendations in the appendix of my update, and my plan is to work on tracking the progress of those. I've categorized each recommendation into one of a few different buckets, and I know you could probably do this a lot of different ways, but this seemed logical to me, and the buckets that I had were those related to policies, metrics, planning, research, and operations. I think that starting with metrics is the easiest. There's no controversy there. It's a very low cost goal. It's something that I think that we need to have if we're going to make solid business decisions. So we're going to grab those and implement them as soon as we can. I think some of these metrics are going to be available in the monthly report, but others we might do on a more of a quarterly basis, depending on what they are. So I'll put together a plan so that we can see those metrics listed in future broadband updates. The next ones are planning and operations recommendations, and I think they deserve analysis and response. So, some are either going to work or they're not. There was a lot of talk about a vibratory plow, ditch switch sort of, direct fiber buried solutions to cut down the cost of installations. That's either going to work or it's not going to work. It might work in certain areas, it might not work in other areas. It might have been tried in other areas in New England, but we need to investigate that. So I pledge to at least analyze all of these and do have some discussions with people to find out if they work, what the cost would be, what the cost benefit would be, and then move those discussions forward and talk about them if they make sense for operations to adopt those strategies. The next are research recommendations, and they include topics like finding external funding or quantifying the cost of expansion, revising methods for computing ROI. So those are tasks that we continually perform anyway, but I think that it's good to add a level of transparency to make the public and the board aware of what we're doing in these areas, so that when we make business decisions, the public and the board knows that we have some science and data behind those decisions. So we'll definitely move forward on communicating and adopting those. And then the final are policy recommendations, and they either represent policies that are already in existence, like the fact that we would support public safety or sustainability efforts of the town, or those that might represent a change, like the universal access. I will move all of these policy recommendations forward for discussions with the town manager, with Dave and others, and we can determine what appetite the select board, the light board, the public have for moving in these directions. I think that solidifying operations so that we know that we're doing things well in a documented and standardized way first is a really high priority. And then adding that layer of transparency so that the public and the boards know what we're doing is the next step. And then it's deciding, where does broadband want to go? What does the community want this asset to become? And we can definitely move forward those policy decisions as well. I know the task force is meeting again tomorrow, and that their work is not quite done, but I'll stay in touch with them. I've got a meeting with Mark on Friday, and I'm happy to advance all of those initiatives so that all that work doesn't go wasted or sit by the wayside as just a paper that's referenced every few years. I'm happy to carry that torch and make sure that we see active movement on all of these, at least to the point where we discuss them and determine if they're viable. And I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Well, thank you, Jason. It's the transparency of information, the information gather, the organization you've brought is very much appreciated. The one comment I had, or one suggestion I would have, once all of those software updates have been completed and you feel that the broadband system is very stable, maybe sending out an insert in the bills that tells people to reset their routers, the simple power down, power up, so that people can really get the speed that they actually expect at the end device. Because I know you do a lot to ensure they get the speed at the modem, but often their own components that they own may need to have firmware updates or other things. So once you're ready, I think that would be a good suggestion for customers to get the best value out of it.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Any other board members have questions?
I feel like the report is in good hands with you, Jason. Thank you so much for being receptive to it. And I know that a lot of what we're talking about is aspirational. The universal access is something that's gonna that doesn't exist now, and who knows, maybe it never will. We spent a ton of time talking about the situation at Concord Green. And even after many, many meetings with representatives of the residents, we just weren't able to come up with a solution that was affordable for everybody and fair. But it's still something to consider. And I just don't want to like toss it away and just give up on it. And an example is that if the character of Concord changes with some of the things that were discussed at town meeting this month, the idea of higher density housing near train stations and so forth, there are going to be new multi-dwelling units. And if we know that they're coming, we could maybe plan for that and have our foot in the door, so to speak.
Mhm.
Anyway, thank you again for all of your openness and consideration and the hard work that you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. Seeing no more questions from the board, I'd like to move on to net book value discussion related to rates. So Dave, who would you like to lead this conversation?
So Laura's going to lead this topic. You should have gotten a memo in your packet on Friday, so hopefully you've had a chance to review it. But I'm going to let Laura take the wheel here.
Dave, are you going to bring that memo up?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so you all received the memo. Are there any questions?
No, I did read it. I think it's great.
I didn't get one.
I could kick us off if you want, but do you want to do a setup on the
Well,
discussion?
I was just kind of joshing with you because it's dense, and if
Oh,
you're
yeah.
not, if you're not into this sort of thing, it's probably pretty dry. But
I'm that kind of geek, but yeah.
Can you
so
guys?
basically,
can you
Yep, we
the
can see it.
memo? Okay.
what we're trying to do here is there was a group of costs when we looked at how would we allocate all the costs of the light plant into different types of incurred expenses. Those that are incurred on a coincident peak basis when we set the annual capacity peak, those that are incurred during the monthly transmission peaks that represents like $5 million of our cost. Those that are attributable to energy, you use 1 more kilowatt hour, the cost goes up. And those that are really fixed in nature and won't change with the amount of electricity being delivered or with the peak quantity. And there was a group of costs from that, it was about $500,000 that had been allocated back to, on a proportionate basis, the CP1, CP12, energy, and NCP and general expenses. And Brian asked the question, excuse me, asked the question, well, if these are general expenses, why are we allocating them back to these different categories? And what we had done in the PowerPoint that we showed you and the subsequent rate that was developed was how the consultant did it in the 2019 cost of service study. Okay, we hired an expert, paid him a lot of money. They come in, they look at our expenses and they say, listen, this is how we would divide up those expenses. So this $500,000 in question is really very general depreciation expenses. So the lion's share of it is on the 1175 Elm Street building, about $200,000. You got some computers, you've got transportation equipment, laboratory equipment, fiber optic equipment, depreciation on the smart grid. So you add all this up, and that had been allocated back to, as I said, those a portion went to each one of the expense categories. So what I'm saying is that in lieu of allocating a portion of the general depreciation expense to each expense type, the full $500,000 could be deemed a fixed cost to be recovered in the monthly customer charge. You could allocate it according to customer count, weighted customer count, or expense. For the purpose of developing the rates that followed in the memo that you were sent, I assumed that we would allocate this $500,000 according to the expense allocator. The expense allocator it represents each class's proportionate share of operating expenses, excluding administrative and general and power purchase expense. So what we're doing is we're taking this $500,000 out of NBV And the NBV allocator is each class's proportionate share of operating expenses, excluding administrative and general, and putting it into this expense allocator. And what that does is it actually allocates a larger share of the cost to the residential rate class and takes it away from the commercial class.
And that is based on each rate class's use of those services, right?
Yeah, it's just that when you go from NBV to expense, you are taking out power purchase from the equation.
Right.
Yep.
So
Yep.
because the commercial rate classes use more power than the residential, they were getting allocated a larger share of the expenses under the NBV methodology. But if we switch to expense, then the residential rate class will incur a larger share than the commercial rate class.
I see.
And Laura, that's still keeping in line with our cost of services, right? Aligning our expenses to our rates. So it seems to be in line with that strategy.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we hired an expert. They did it according to NBV, which is
Yep,
why on the
yep.
first round, we just
Yep.
replicated that. I'm just
Right.
saying, hey, they're the
Yep.
experts. This is what they did. What I sent you in the memo was pulling them out of the way they did it and
Yep.
putting it into general expense, which I think, you could make an argument for. We just mentioned here that, it is, actually, I don't know if we do mention it here, Dave. This might not be, is this the final one? Yeah, it's signed, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. And so what follows are the sample bills. And Wendy, you had asked me, to make sure that I showed you samples of the commercial rate classes, because in the last presentation, we just did R1.
Yep.
So you see R1 again,
Yep.
and then you see G1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, and that the energy, that your statement earlier about the share is much broader on the energy for those larger for the general classes.
Yeah, and I do want to just mention here for anybody who might be listening, because I heard between last meeting and this meeting that there was confusion. The message somehow got out that this $65 or $67 per month monthly charge was only going to be charged to solar customers. That was going to be like their penalty, for being a solar customer. And I said, no, we must have presented both ideas during one meeting, like moving, variable into fixed. And then also maybe we talked about solar net metering, and that confusion happened. So we should state clearly that we're talking about this as a rate for all customers, not just solar customers.
Right.
And the purpose of this memo came out of our previous discussion in
Right.
trying to clean up that CP1 and CP2 to really just reflect expenses during that moment. Whereas, taking those NPV or those values that we had kind of not given a specific category to, and we gave it to all categories. Instead of giving to all categories, we remove those categories in the power supply and applied them across the other more operational related categories. Is that a good summary of what was done?
Yes.
Yeah, and that the important thing about this process is relating expense categories to collection method. And the weights, the percentage weights, we haven't talked a lot about those, but those were based on neighboring utilities, because we don't have our smart meters in place yet to have our own specific data set. So this is a great way to get us started on this conversation, but people should know it is not the end of this conversation. These aren't rates we're going to approve. This is part of the exercise of getting to that time of use rate that we've been focusing on developing for the pilot.
So wait, so this basically, if we had a sample per household fixed cost in last meeting of around $60, $64.
Yep.
Mhm.
If I understand what this is doing is it's moving, even more expenses onto residential, so that $64 is going to go up even more.
To
Do I understand that right?
Yeah,
67.
67.50.
Yeah, wait, so
Instead of six,
look, I'm leaving the board, so I mean, I guess my opinion doesn't really matter, but why are we trying to do
Okay.
this to residents? But,
So-
and
It's
I
still
gotta ask
revenue
again,
neutral, right?
it's exactly.
but I gotta ask again, why is it that larger users can't pay more?
So Gordon, this is about understanding what it costs to support the residents from an operational standpoint. What are the fixed expenses in supporting the 7,000 residential customers? So this is revenue neutral, meaning that your bills should not change if this was implemented. That's still happening. Whether we collect in a fixed or variable method is still going to be discussed. We haven't concluded on that. The $67.50 that's outlined here, we could collect a $20 fixed charge and then collect a variable distribution per kilowatt hour fee like we do today to accomplish the 67.50.
So this is an accounting, it's an accounting question, right?
Right, but
And what we're
It's just an
specifically,
accounting question, right? I mean,
No.
it's a
it's
cost
strategic.
allocation question. And what I see happening is costs are getting moved from commercial to residential.
Right.
It's by moving it off of the NVB, I said
that
that
is
wrong,
correct.
to the expense, it's moving it from a class base to a, I guess, an account base, right?
So
That certain costs are allocated to classes right now. They're moving out of, which is the MBV allocation, and they're being moved into expenses, which is going to essentially have the effect of loading more of these costs onto residents.
you are correct, Gordon. So, and you're correct to what is, let's see, $2.55. That's the per customer movement in increase per customer. So again, this is not set in stone, a rate that we're going to vote on and go forward. We have a lot of work to do on discussing the ratios. We have a lot of work to do to discuss the structure, whether we want, the TOU and demand, and how much are we going to collect in variable and fixed. The last thing we're going to do is do a dramatic change in rates or do a large shift of collection from one class to the other. So this is a necessary thing. This is going back to the basics. This is going, not just referring to the R1 and making decisions, assuming that the R1 is correct. This is checking the R1 and preparing to have real discussions about rate design for time of use. And I think I'm going to hold on the next comment I was going to make, but there's more to come. This
Yeah.
isn't. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so I think, we're going through a number of different pieces of the rates. We have been for a couple months now. We're going to continue to go through them. And I think one of the things that's going to be important, I'm planning on having a summary of all of we discussed in a meeting. And that's when we'll have the board take a position. So we're going through a bunch of things. There's a bunch more to go through. But I think we're going to do a summary of all of that and what was discussed, and then have the board take a position at that time.
And some of these are all our rate philosophy. So this is getting
Right.
to the heart of the fixed component, because by allocating the cost that is truly fixed, we're less susceptible in the future should our variable rates, not the rates, but our energy consumption decline. So we're less susceptible to that, the financial impact of the variability of our energy use.
Right, and in the concept of revenue decoupling, where the light plant collects more fixed cost recovery in a fixed manner, allows the light plant to engage with solar, knowing that it is stable in its operational funding. Right now, conservation and generation raise rates because they reduce sales volume, which means that we now have to collect more of these fees from other customers. So with this, each customer is paying for the light plant in an equal share. There's a lot of discussion needs to go around how we transition to that. to make it fair and to ensure that those customers that are on rate assistance or are in that lower consumption barrier don't find that the majority of their bill is this fixed fee. But we do need to go that direction in order to get this penetration of renewables and these conservation efforts while we get the increases in loads from fuel switching. This is fundamental, and this is why we have to stop referring to the R1 rate, and we have to do this process. So there's more to come on that. Is there anything else in this memo, Laura or Dave, that you feel we need to discuss at this time?
No, I think Laura went through it all. This is more of a follow-up from the last discussion we had on this topic.
Right.
Because there were some questions and we wanted to kind of close the loop on it.
And I had requested at the last discussion to kind of get an Excel file of this so that we could look at it in that fashion, so that, offline, we can kind of understand these numbers a bit better. And does the board have any more questions on this topic?
No.
I don't
Not a-
see any.
Nope.
Okay, so let's move on to smart meter funding. Dave, do you want to lead this discussion?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, we're, as I mentioned in my update, we're, getting closer to contract negotiations for smart meters. And I thought it was appropriate this time to start the discussion on the funding piece. I sent a memo out in the packet, and I'll summarize that. And Matt did some pieces of that, and he'll speak to that as well. But essentially, we're estimating the smart meter project to range between $3.5 and $4 million in total. And in terms of funding, there are a couple options. We did go to town meeting in 2017 under Article 26 and got authorization for a borrowing of $3 million for smart meters. Obviously, it's 2022 and costs have gone up. So, that's where I am at the 3.5 to 4 million. That's not a set in stone number, but that's what we're projecting. So that said, we can do a couple different things. We can talk about funding through depreciation fund, funding through the bond authorization, or a mix of the two. And essentially, the depreciation fund is healthy. It's got about 6.4 million in it, which is a little over the fund balance restriction of 6 million that the board voted through. And that's primarily because we haven't started our capital projects yet this year, which would bring it down. But the other option would be the unrestricted balance, but that's really not an option because there's only about 150,000 in there. So the other thing to note is through the depreciation annually, we collect about 1.9 million in depreciation, and that money is used to put into the system by law. That's what all it can be used for. So what we're proposing here is, opposed to funding this fully from depreciation, is to actually do a bond authorization and fund some from depreciation. We have some notable projects coming up that will require the use of the depreciation fund, and they'll draw it down. Our target is to keep the depreciation fund no lower than 1.5 million annually. We've drawn it down lower than that a couple times in the last 15 years, and it's a little scary from my standpoint. So if we can keep it around 1.5 at a minimum, that gives us a little flexibility for unexpected things that come up. And so with that, I'm going to share my screen and show you what Matt put together, and he can speak to the numbers.
And it should be also mentioned the, you in the memo you had mentioned future projects included the substation transmission components, as well as utility scale batteries, which are both very large ticket items. that we do not have any kind of opportunity to bond issue for. So those are what we're keeping in mind when we talk about future expenses.
Yeah, and just to make sure that we're clear, we're talking about the sub-transmission feeders, underground circuits from station 219 to station 223. So that's what I was referring to. And there's 4 of them. So
And a dollar estimate on that project?
that's in the millions. And I can't put an estimate on it right now because I'd have to get a price on the conductors. But currently, not to get too technical, but currently there's 4 circuits that are million aluminum, and we'd be talking about probably putting in 750 copper. Copper's expensive.
Yeah.
So we have to do some more engineering and analysis on it, but that is something that is on our radar. So, Matt, do you want to go through these options?
Sure. So these are our cash balances at the end of February, which is our the last month we have final numbers for. As you can see, the top one is the depreciation fund at almost 6.4 million, which is, as Dave said, over that $6 million range. And then we have a pretty good amount in the underground fund that'll be used up by some of the projects that we have going on this summer. And then our operating cash is, pretty low. We would like to have that higher. So I don't think that's an option really at this point. And then on the next page, I put together just some sample debt schedules of what we could expect if we were to issue debt. And so on the left side you have if we issued 3 million in debt, what it would look like over a 10-year and a 15-year term. And on the right, I just kind of picked a dollar amount of 2 million, and you see what it is for a 10 and 15-year term. So to me, I think we pretty much have to do a mix of debt and cash, but I think that's actually a good thing, so we can drain our depreciation fund a little bit, use some of our cash on hand, and then also issue some debt with that.
And so, Matt, what's the likelihood that we could issue this for 5%? The rates are changing quickly. I mean, I don't know how quickly we could go to market and we would finalize that rate.
Yeah, I mean, interest rates with interest rates rising. I don't really know. I looked up some of the more recent issues around Massachusetts, and they're current for AAA rated entities, towns. They're getting 5% right now. That was actually the same interest rate we had on our last bond, which was issued about this time last year.
Okay.
So presumably it could go up a little bit, although we did get a pretty good chunk of premium with that 5%.
Yeah.
So.
And then in terms of terms, as the town, we typically have 10-year kind of terms. Want to comment on the term?
So.
Please into our bonding.
As far as fairness is concerned, you really want to issue your debt with the life expectancy of the asset. Right. Which I think we had determined is 15 years, I believe, Dave, 10 to 15.
Did we? That's a question I had. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So in the AMS discussions, it's the consultants have been using a 15-year life cycle on this.
So we have some flexibility in what we issue. We just need to let the finance department know that that's what we would prefer, is that term, whatever term we decide.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things to note here is, the difference between the 10 and the 15-year is the amount of interest you're paying, right? So
right.
You're going from again, this is a forecast, but interest combined interest of 825,000 versus 1.2 million. So that's really the difference in the 5 years. So I think go ahead,
I guess the only consideration is that what we do have in the future some other large expenses, so it's likely that we may have other debt expense in our future. So just keeping that in mind.
Yeah, and that is in mind, and, you know, Matt and I talked last week about our existing debt and what's coming off in the next, you
Right.
know, 5 years, and so
Right.
we're
Yep.
looking at the whole thing.
Yep.
I think what we're really looking for, just so we have it in play, is the board comfortable with, you know, going forward with the, you know, the bond authorization of 3 million, and then funding the rest of the project through the depreciation fund. And that's really what we're looking at. In terms of what option we go with, 10-year or 15. We just showed you these to give you an idea of what it would look like based on today's numbers. This is something that, you know, we'll work with the town manager on
Right.
in terms of how we go forward in the finance department. But we just wanted you guys to have an idea of what we're looking at today.
But I would certainly support going for the 3 million in debt funding. It's part of our
And-
plan all along, so I think we should and capitalize on the better rates while we have them.
I would
They're gonna
agree.
change.
I think rates are going to go up. I think the 10-year is my preference, because I don't like to see debt stay on the balance sheet for, you know, because it's easy to just look at the near-term numbers and say, oh, it's great, we don't have to impact rates by financing forever. I would, a 10-year term makes a lot more sense to me. And yes, we do have some major expenses coming up, you know, with those conduits and with storage, which is absolutely necessary if we're going to have any kind of solar adoption schedule that's of scale.
Yeah, and it, you know, Dave, I think in your budget, you put together a projection of our debt service, and it looked like it went right through 2027, and after that, it sort of drops off, but
Yeah.
something, there's always going to be debt in our portfolio, right? So
Yeah, and we can
balance.
put together the debt summary and send it to the board just so you guys have it.
it's there.
Um,
Yep.
It's already
It-
done.
it-
so.
We have it.
It was in the summary.
Yep.
So we have it. It
Yep.
is nice to see that those, you know, there's a previous 4 million and a previous 3.9 million that are down to, you know, hundreds of thousands at this point, which is great.
Yep.
All right.
Great.
Do you have the guidance you need, Dave and Matt?
So is it the sense of the board that going with the bond authorization is acceptable? I think I heard from Wendy and Brian. I don't know about the others.
Gordon
Yeah.
and Pam, your thoughts?
That makes sense to me.
I'll
You're
go
still
along
here,
with it.
Gordon. You're
Yeah.
important.
You know, I've had my doubts about the value of the metering project since the beginning. I've always been skeptical that it has a really positive return on investment. You know, there's the bit about shaving the peak, or that we'd be able to incentivize behavior using it that would save us some on capacity charges. But I think that the project is, aside from the ROI, I think it's admirable on a number of different dimensions in terms of it puts us into a better operational capability, more responsive to errors and to down outages and so forth. So because of that, I've been willing to support it, and I will support it here.
Okay, great. All right, I'm going to keep us moving along, and we'll go on to the next discussion point, which is the wind project that is a potential asset.
Yeah, so I'm gonna bring up a slide deck. Give me a second. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
All right, so we have a wind option in front of us. It's a new wind project located up in Maine. It's got good capacity factors. It's high. It's looking like it would be a 25-year option. So, you know, pretty long contract. I think the interesting thing is it's 7.2 megawatts, and we get a third of that share. So that equates to about 5% of our annual energy needs. You can see the annual output there. It's coming back with a 40% capacity factor. So it does come with class 1 mass recs, which I know the board is in favor, and it's a fixed price. And so, you know, I like fixed prices. I'm not a
Yeah.
big fan of escalators. We do have contracts with them, but it's nice to know what your cost is going to be on an annual basis. This project and it's scheduled to be online Q2 of 2023.
Wow.
I'm not sure I'm 100% on board with that, just because of all the supply chain issues that we're hearing about. And so that potentially could change. We've seen it with some other projects, but that's what they're forecasting right now. So, you know, we got to go with what they're saying. The big takeaways on this, again, it's about 5% of our annual needs. It's a little bit higher than some other wind projects that we've had happening right now that we're involved with. What I would say is the price on this one is in line with the existing wind contracts we have in Maine. So it's in that range. But, you know, as we renegotiate those projects, the prices are lower, and that's the difference we're seeing here. So the big question from our standpoint is the board comfortable with continuing to go after this renewable source with the class 1 recs at a 6% higher cost than other contracts that we're negotiating for the same type of things?
Pam,
I have a question. This is an offshore installation, obviously, right?
No, this is onshore. It's
Right. On a
on the
peninsula.
coast.
I'm sorry, it's onshore installation. Is it installed yet, or
No.
that's the 2023 piece is the installation?
The 2023 is when it would come online.
Come online. So it's being built now, or?
It's in development.
Well, they have to get contracts in place first.
Yeah, okay, I see.
Yeah.
So my question goes to, just as a recurring theme for me is just when we enter these thought processes to consider whether everybody has crossed their I's and dotted their I's and crossed their T's on environmental impact, because so is there any question about permitting or about anything that could introduce unforeseen consequences? Have we looked at are we looking at that piece of it? It's just a question I think we should ask every time we do this stuff. Just have the other environmental impacts been considered, as well as the positive, obviously positive, and I'm a great fan of this, but I just want to make sure we do that stuff.
Yeah, so the people that are building the wind turbines and all that, they have to go through a process in Maine. And so that goes through that process. And Energy New England, from our standpoint, they represent us on these things. And so they would go through those pieces with them. But that's really between the company and the state of Maine to go through the environmental impacts. We don't deal with that directly.
Well, we don't deal with it directly, but as a policy matter, we should ask those questions, it would seem to me. But I understand, and I'm familiar with the process in Maine. It's fairly rigorous, and I just but there's many slip tricks with the cup and the lip on this stuff too, right? Especially with respect to environmental or public reaction or whatever. But your answer is that we defer to the state of Maine's regulatory process, and so far so good on that score, I guess.
We've had good luck so far.
Yeah. I just reiterate that I think that absolute deference to regulators on this stuff. We should just be careful that we're looking closely at that kind of problem.
Well, and just to extend your thought there, Pamela, Pam, you know, the Quebec Hydro project transmission line got shut down by in Maine. And there's laws that restrict now the transportation of power through and from through Maine, but also possibly from Maine, that could affect the viability of project like. So look, I don't know what the details of that, but there's potential political or regulatory risk for a project like this. But nevertheless, I think it's okay to proceed. We're not really the ones bearing that risk. And if the thing falls through, we'll just have to find another project.
Well, that
instead of it.
is a question I'd like to clarify. So
Right.
Dave, if we enter into a contract, because this is a new developer, this isn't a well-proven developer. And if we enter into this contract and say this developer can't fulfill on the contract, what is our exposure?
So there's, you know, once we get into the agreements, all that stuff is covered, right? We're not there yet. So when that sort of thing happens, there's, you know, if they don't produce what they're supposed to, there's penalties. If they can't come through on the project, those are set up in the purchase power agreements as well. So we're not there yet, Brian, but those are things that we do take into consideration.
So when are we locking in theoretically?
When are we locking into the
We're not.
project? We haven't. yet.
2023
Yeah,
or?
No, so, you know, assuming we want to move forward with our interest in this, you know, in the board, if the board's in favor of it, you know, I'll talk to the town manager and then we'll let Energy New England know that we're on board. That's the process. And then they go from there and start discussing the project with Mason Bay and working with council to get the PPA set up and reviewed and make sure everything's acceptable. And then we execute the PPAs and the project starts. Laura, do you want to add to that?
Laura?
Yeah, so just to address your question very specifically, Brian, we would have mark-to-market risk. Since this is a fixed price contract, but it's a unit contingent take or pay. So it's not like we give the guy any money up front. He gives us power, we pay him for it. But let's say we enter into this deal, we sign a contract and they fall through. Well, what we're out is we had a deal with them at X price. And when we go out to get the next project, if it's X plus, right, then we would be out that difference. But if the market goes down, it would actually be to our favor.
Right.
So it's mark-to-market risk that we would bear. You're absolutely right. This is a smaller developer, been in the town a long time developing real estate. So they're not really an energy, you know, developer. So to me, there's more risk in this deal than there would be in a normal deal. On the other hand, there aren't all that many incremental opportunities out there. There's a lot of existing wind. And does the light plant want to just keep buying existing wind projects, getting the Massachusetts Class 1 RECs, or do we want to pay more to get smaller projects like this one that have more risk potentially up and running? By the way, we would be going in with 2 other MLPs. You know, we're a third of the off-taker, and there are 2 other MLPs that would be there with us. So we wouldn't be completely out on a limb, but you know, it's an interesting project, but it poses these questions that you all have to answer about what you want, what type of resource you want to pursue.
Yeah, and we've had, for example, the Saddleback Wind Project. This is more expensive than that, and that was built quite some time ago. So I do have some concern about, I mean, it is a non-escalating price, which is nice. But I do have some concerns about the price they're asking for, being higher than our average cost of generation, but that's normal with wind. And for the fact that it's higher than our past wind projects, which will come up for new negotiations, and we expect those to go lower. Because we very much want to support these kinds of projects, but we need to make sure we do our financial, you know, due diligence, because we are going to be paying R&S on these kilowatts that we receive from out of town.
So just to be clear, it's lower than some of the main wind that we have now, and it's higher than some of it. So it's right in that mix.
Oh,
Okay, so it's,
I thought you said it was 6% higher. That was,
Than the renegotiated wind projects that we have.
okay, so,
right.
Yeah.
so it's 6% higher than the renegotiated price, but it is still lower than the initial price that we paid.
than one of the wind contracts, and it's a little higher than the other one. So it's literally
In the middle.
In the middle.
half a penny, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, the other thing, Brian, is it's a little bit apples and oranges. Our other wind projects that we initially contracted for included capacity. This one would only include energy and Rex. So you can't just look at the two prices and say they're equal because one has more stuff in it than the other one does.
I see. So there is no capacity, even though the project can get a 40% on capacity. There is no capacity being agreed to here.
No, and Energy New England thought that that was actually a benefit because there are very high penalties right now that are being assessed by the ISO for non-performance during peak periods that fall to the producer. And we don't feel like this producer has enough financial, resources to be able to withstand some of those penalties. And so in our view, that's actually, we don't really want to get into that with them because it could cause, financial variability that we don't want to have.
And again, the contract is worded such that if they produce, we pay. And if they don't produce, we don't pay.
Correct.
I think the due diligence question is kind of the place I'm going with this. I'm a big, huge fan of wind and any other renewables. I'm also a fan of supporting the development of these projects. I do think we have more than a financial obligation, however, and I hope we're not thinking just in number crunching ways here and deferring entirely to others on this. I think we have a public policy responsibility, and we're setting standards every time we choose a project. So I just hope that going forward, as we increase and even consider this one, that we are thinking about unintended consequences and what the impacts may be, and that we don't move so prematurely that if something goes wrong, you look back at the history of our thought process and we say, well, we did this without knowing enough. And so frankly, I couldn't be happier about this kind of thing, but I think methodically thinking things through and being in a position where we can say, looking back, that we did everything we needed to do, and do understand that all of our projects, they're in service of environmental protection, actually, because they're dealing with greenhouse gases, but they often have unintended consequences, and we need to be mindful of that and make sure that when we do every one of these things, we're thinking through not just the money, but also the other kind of impacts. So it's good to hear that two other municipalities are doing this. But I encourage us to think everything through very carefully.
So, Brian, I'm in support of this project. I think the pricing is in the range that we need. I'm also reminded that we have a mix of energy that still has a very high percentage of nuclear in it, and how many projects will we have coming forward? So I just think that we should pursue this. I think we've also gone on record saying that green energy is going to cost us more, and we know that. Granted, it's relative to our other wind projects, but I'd be in support of moving forward.
I'm certainly in support of I don't care about the money at all.
Well, that's our
do.
responsibility.
We
is to care
should,
about the
right.
money.
I care about the money, but my comments are narrowly
Right.
focused on a piece of the process. But I just want to make sure everybody understood. I don't have a problem if we need to, for having thought it through reasonably, and willingly accept a higher incremental cost. That's not an issue.
So
But I do care about cost. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we have a fiduciary responsibility for what rates we're collecting for. So my feelings on this project are it is, as Pam has pointed out, it goes along with the philosophy of the town, where we want to see more direct support of these kinds of renewable projects from the light plant. It's not, this is one of the aspects of public power that the IOUs cannot do, which is we can be vertically integrated. We could actually own the windmill and operate it ourselves. I don't suggest that. I know Princeton's example, that's not necessarily the risk we want to take on. But what this contract does is it does move this it does get the installation of this windmill done by these 3 MLPs and allows that project to happen, which is it's a philosophy side. The financial side, I think the contracts where we buy as an agreed upon price as we go, and that agreed upon price is within a range that we find acceptable. I think that's good. And I thank you for explaining the capacity risk. I think that analysis was correct, that, you know, this is a new developer that may be overestimating their capacity value and may find in the reality of the ISO that logic doesn't always follow. And they may not hit those performance targets, and we don't have risk exposure to that. I think that's important. And so I'm in favor of it in a general sense. I think we do need to have that discussion in depth about nuclear and its financial benefits, as well as its environmental benefits. And so the only for upcoming meetings, I think it would be valuable once we have the new member on board to do an executive session, Dave, where we look at our existing contracts. We can discuss pricing such that when we use these relative terms in the open meeting, members have a clear understanding of those values. I know we want to keep those numbers confidential for competitive reasons. So I think that would be a good meeting to have, such that members understand, you know, the unit price for these different contracts. And when we have these discussions, those relative terms will make more sense.
Brian, I just want, because I'm a board member and maybe on the board for a while, I want to be very, very clear that I am not indifferent to the costs of what we're doing. I was being a little flippant. I was really addressing a specific, in the context of what I was saying earlier. I was saying I was setting aside cost. I was thinking environmental, but it's very important that everyone understand that I understand my responsibilities on the board, and I'm not indifferent to how much things cost by any means. Okay.
Dave, you wanted to make a comment about that executive session.
Yeah, no, we can certainly do that if that's what you want. We haven't done one of those in a while. It's probably not a bad idea to get the board updated on contracts and that sort of thing. But when we do that, it's just important for the board to remember that it is confidential information and it shouldn't be shared. So.
Gordon.
Yes, Brian, you mentioned nuclear a second ago, and I just wanted to add this. It's sort of a thought that I want to leave the board with, and it's just that I attended the Cooler Concord Sustainability keynote address on the 27th, and Dr. Carrie Emanuel talked about reducing carbon and a plan for implementing renewable energy, but also nuclear. And that in his view, we can't get there without including, and this is globally. So let's not just write nuclear out of the equation. Then again, we're not the world. We're not making decisions for the whole world. But I think that an expert opinion like that calls for nuclear is supports our view as a board, or the decisions that we've made in the past to include nuclear in our mix.
Yeah, so there's nuclear is definitely a topic that will take a good 20-30 minutes to have a full discussion on. Thank you.
That's fine. Thanks.
I just want to reiterate, Carrie is a very, very credible, globally credible figure, and many people at MIT are very much in favor of nuclear. I think it was important that Gordon make that point, because we're not talking about it now, but it is not something that we're going to just, it's an important part of the mix, I think. So thank you, Gordon. Thank you.
Any other comments on the wind project by board members? All right. So
Brian, is everyone supportive of it? I think I heard that, but I'd like to confirm it.
Yeah.
Yep. Wendy has shared that. I've shared that. I think Pam is very in favor, and I think Gordon has shared that as well. So, yep. The next thing on our agenda is to talk about the vehicle charging at Concord Green. Dave, who would you like to lead this?
Laura's going to lead this topic, and I'm going to share my screen. Can you guys see that?
I can see it, yeah. So Alice had apparently received an inquiry from a resident at Concord Green about what CMLP is charging at the stations, whether that is fair, and whether that represents a good value for that customer. So what we've done here is we're going to share some facts about what has happened between August of 2020 and I believe it was March of this year. If you recall, the Concord Green multi-dwelling unit shared charger was a pilot program where we put some rates out, and we said we needed really to collect some data about how people are using this charger in order to inform rates and policy about shared chargers in general. And so the questions we're going to look at here are, when are the residents at Concord Green using the shared charger? What's the utilization rate then of the equipment during each of the peak periods? And what has CMLP been collecting relative to its costs and required recovery of asset deployment dollars? So first question is, when are customers charging? And again, this covers the period August 2020 to March 2022. We can see that 87% of all the kilowatt hours that CMLP sold in that shared charger happened off peak. That is between 10 p.m. And 2 p.m. On weekdays and all day on weekends. 7% was sold during the peak period, which is 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. And another 7% was sold in the evening between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Before you go to the next slide, Dave, I just want to mention that the pricing at the Concord Green shared charger was set at $1.20 an hour off peak, which is the same as the public chargers in town. $3 an hour during the peak period between 2 to 7, which is also the same as the public chargers in town. But then this evening peak was set at $2 an hour. And the reason we added a third tier at the shared charger at Concord Green was we were trying to increase the utilization of the infrastructure. And we anticipated that time period between 7 and 10 p.m. would be very popular for people because they'd be getting home from work. That would be the most convenient time to plug in. And so we wanted to offer an incentive to have people go back out at 10 p.m. and plug in when it might not be so convenient by offering a lower price. So the next slide will show what the percent utilization has been. What utilization means here is we know the hours that the shared charger was used. We know how many total hours existed during that time period. And so the hours of use divided by the total is the percent utilization. So off peak, we see a 21% utilization. Peak, it's very small. It's a 5% utilization. And the evening period is interesting. It turned out to be 15%, which is certainly much higher than the peak, but lower than the off peak. So to me, what this says is that people are using the charger during the evening, that our assumption that that would be a popular time period is correct. And then even with the higher pricing, people are finding value in charging during that evening period. Next slide is, I'm sorry, this is a bit busy, but I'll walk you through it. When we put these chargers in, there was a pretty significant cost between the equipment and the installation and the setup. It was about $10,500. And what we determined is that we would need to generate about $2,360 a year in revenue in order to pay that cost, that charger back over 7 years at a 5% weighted average cost of capital. And in 2021, the shared charger at Concord Green generated about $1,194 in income, broken out by those time periods that you saw, evening, off-peak and peak. So despite the pricing that we have and the utilization rates that we've seen, we're only collecting about half of what we need to in order to pay the cost of that charger back. So in summary, next slide, please. 87% of all the kilowatt hours are sold during the off-peak period. The utilization rates are 21, 5, and 15 for off-peak, peak, and evening. And we're collecting about half the revenue that we need to collect from the shared charger to pay back the cost of the capital. I think we believe that the pricing that we've set out in the pilot, the $3, $2, and $1.20, does seem to be working. That evening period, people are charging there at a higher utilization percentage than they are in the off-peak. And at this point, I don't think we would suggest changing that pricing scheme, but we did want to share those numbers with you, in part because of the inquiry that Alice received.
Well, I have some questions. So the $1.20 for the off-peak time, the rate of charge is 6.6 kilowatt. So that's about 18 cents for each kilowatt hour during that hour. And then, during the times of peak time, that goes up. But that's to cover not only the cost that we have to collect for supplying the energy, but also that 10,500 for the installation. And it looks like it's going to take longer to recoup that $10,000 under this current method, by about twice as long. What is the life of that unit? It's, I know it does include installation, so those units cost what, $3,000 each, and then the installation was maybe the $7,000 roughly.
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I think it's more than 3,000 for the unit itself. The life expectancy is the part that's a little bit problematic. The first charger we put in, the main board on it failed after, when it just came out of warranty. So it's hard to say, right? So we planned it on a 7-year payback because we expect to have to upgrade the circuit boards and things of that nature because it's,
Okay.
devices after 7 years.
So it doesn't look like we're going to recoup full cost recovery for that unit.
Well,
That's correct.
not necessarily, because, if the unit starts getting utilized more, then the numbers change. So,
So with I see the the utilization per time period, which is a good way to look at those percentages. So it looks like it's 21% occupied during the off-peak when the prices are low. And that makes sense, as residents can learn the rate structure pretty easily and can make their decisions to save a few dollars. I do like the addition of the evening peak, and it does have some usage, which shows that it's not financially such a barrier. But I would really love to see that usage go up from 21% and 15% up to double those values, such that we can really start to recoup this investment and show a business model for doing this in more locations. As it stands now, it's a public good in the sense that this isn't a self-supporting business, and it encourages people to buy EVs and do fuel switching, which is in line with our mission. So this is great analysis. Any other board members have comments or questions?
I just wanted to observe, I think, Brian, you said that the numbers here for evening show that the cost is not a deterrent. And I think on a very broad scale that may be true, but I think, and this goes to tiered rates and time of use and everything else, we have to be mindful of what I would call inelastic demand. So we can't just assume that because people are, are doing this at a particular time, that it's something they're choosing to do. People don't have choices often, which is not to say I don't think that on a very gross scale, this is, you're probably saying something that's correct, but I do think going forward, we have to keep in mind the problem of inelasticity
Yeah.
for some purchasers, and that can get really important at some point.
And this is, I'm gonna make one quick comment, Wendy, and then I'll call on you. So the all of the multi-dwelling units where Concord Light's responsibility really stops at the property boundary. We're going to continue to try to innovate and find solutions to meet the needs of those customers, at 25% of customers that are in this situation. That's why we did the pilot. That's where this came from. It's difficult because you've got another board with the HOA that you have to work with, whether it be in broadband, whether it be in EVs or other efforts that we're trying to make accessible to all citizens. So this is I'm going to stop. I'm going to let Wendy comment because she's been very patient. And Gordon, I'll have you next. Wendy, I think you might be muted. I'm going to go to Gordon.
Oh, there you go.
There we
Sorry,
go.
I don't know why that button isn't working. So I just want to represent the citizens' concern that was raised. So the essence or the gist, if I recall, it was that there was a concern that this individual was getting charged. So she's charging a car, but then as soon as she stops drawing power because the car is charged, she's still plugged in, and she's concerned that she's continuing to get charged. So I think by the
yes.
nature of what we've designed it, we expect people will charge and then unplug and move the car, right? So I think that's part of the concern. Just want to comment that. Because it was a perception that that's different than other charging in other towns. Just say that.
Laura, do you have any data on idle fees from that station?
Not off the top of my head about what percent of our total charged hours were from times when people were not drawing power. I don't have that off the top of my head, but that's probably something we can look at, Brian. I'll just point out that what the customer is concerned about is not an unintended consequence, if you will.
It is an intended, yeah.
It's by design.
Right.
In other words, we wanted to make sure that we continued. That's why we charge by the hour. Is we don't want people plugging in and then staying there all day, because then other people can't use it. I mean, this is not a charger at someone's home that they get to choose. We're trying to promote sharing, and that's what the pricing scheme was about. That's why you get $1 per hour. Now, in this particular customer's case, there's the added complexity that they were charging a plug-in hybrid vehicle that only draws power at 3.3 kilowatts. Okay, our station can supply at 6.6, and most full battery electric vehicles draw at 6.6
or higher.
Or higher,
yeah,
if the station can give it. But as Brian did his arithmetic, it's only costing 18 cents for someone drawing at 6.6, but it's obviously costing 36 cents for someone drawing at 3.3. And so, there's nothing really I can do about that. It's the equipment, the customer has selected. And so that was another twist to this particular inquiry.
And I know that I know a lot about different charging schemes. And Tesla, for example, they have their superchargers, they have sites with high demand, and they create rate structures to incentivize turnover. And so if you pull into a supercharger, you're paying a per kilowatt hour fee. So you're paying for the actual energy getting into your battery at an equivalent rate to someone else at a different rate of charge. But they do apply very high idle fees, meaning that when your car reaches fully charged, you're charged $1 a minute if you continue to sit there on that charger and leave it idle and unavailable to another customer. So maybe that is something we should consider. I don't know if our technology supports that. That would be question one. And is there a real benefit to doing that with such a high idle fee? But someone with a plug-in hybrid would be charged less because they're consuming less power, even because they're slower at charging their vehicle. But this is shared charging is a temporary or gap solution while we transition to these electric vehicles in mass. And so this isn't perfect, but it is a solution for those customers on the property. Gordon, you had a comment?
Yeah, thank you. I think we've covered most of what I wanted to say, but it was a very interesting email. And I just have to say that as I was reading it, I was struck by how different my perspective is, knowing how that these, how hard Laura has worked and collaborated with key members of the Concord Green community, that there was a kind of developed a shared understanding of what the issues are. And the email, was new to that conversation and had a bunch of preconceptions and so forth that, as Wendy said, hey, it's unfair that I have to pay after I've finished charging. Now, so I'm just suggesting that this is ultimately a customer relations challenge. And I'm sure that the light plant has experience with this and can help communicate to the ratepayer, how we came to the place that we are and how it was developed with the point of view of fairness and so forth. So nevertheless, it's really great to listen to these. And in this discussion, I see that even what we have right now is not necessarily a perfect system. So that's a great conversation to have.
Yep.
Thank you, Dave and Laura. Is there any additional comments you'd like to make?
Nope.
Any board comments?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to move us on to liaison and public comments. Is there anyone who would like to make a public comment? Carlin, please go right ahead.
Hi, Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. This is going back way to the beginning of today's program, dealing with the double poll survey. Dave, I'm very glad that you're doing this survey. In addition to relieving the eyesores of double polls, it's also going to be necessary to complete a component of the new 5G policy that the town is considering right now, because on page 6, section 4A of that 5G wireless policy that's being proposed, there's a prohibition of placing the 5G antennas on double poles. Now, it's going to be really good to know where those double poles are so that you know where they're allowed and where these antennas are not allowed. So I would strongly encourage you to follow through and get that survey done as soon as possible so that we can implement that component of the upcoming 5G wireless policy. Thank you. That's it.
Great. I think I saw Pamela Dritt as next.
Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green. I have 5 questions. One, can we continue to hold and record the board meetings on Zoom and publish them on the Minuteman system so we can have a record to support the minutes no matter how they're written? Everybody gets their best thing.
Quick answer is yes, we're going to continue to do that. At some point, we'll move to hybrid meetings, but I believe that we'll still have video capability.
Thank you. Wonderful. Also, where do we find links to the package of information you have, like Laura's presentation or Jason's fiber update and letters from the public? Can I suggest you do it like the planning board and the fiber completion network do it by putting a link in the agenda?
We can look at those options.
Yeah, so I'm going to meet with Dave about how we write up agendas, giving more detail and doing some other planning, we'll consider that.
Because I really would like to be able to look at those presentations the way you do. And I can't do it just without having access to them.
Great. You listed, you had a lot of questions, so
Yes.
I want to keep us to that, timeline, and I've got two other people waiting.
Will the new meters work with software systems like Tesla's battery, Opticaster, and AutoBidder to enable distributed energy and microgrid control?
That's a very detailed question. Let's follow up when we discuss the AMS project in more detail in the future.
Is CMLP aiming for using customers' batteries and like the electric school bus fleet and the battery storage for grid balancing and
yes,
peak reduction? And
so the core project is about the metering system and about getting Concord Light actionable data. But there are things that can be built on top of that called DERMS that do that. And it's not core to the project, but it is something that we know is coming.
great. And it won't be, oh, when we want to do that, we realize the meters won't do it.
I can't predict everything in the future, but I do want to get to your next two questions so that we can keep.
How do we, right now, is residential solar being incentivized? Are we paying solar customers the same or higher for the high quality electricity they put onto the grid as the electricity they draw from the grid?
We still have the $3,100 rebate, and they still do get to net over the month, meaning that there's a 1-for-1 value over the month.
Okay.
In your final question?
Do you
I'm
know
sorry.
how much, do you know how much Concord Green plugs in during off-peak on the weekends versus during the weekdays? Because I do it. I notice it's more on the weekend.
Okay, I don't have that available, but we can. Laura, do you feel you could follow up with that? Okay, she's nodding yes. All right, thank you, Pam. Mary?
Thank you, Brian. Hi, my name is Mary Hartman. I live in Concord Green, but that's not important. What's important is that I was recently elected to the select board and I am the liaison to the board. Actually, being on CMLP was my first choice when I was given the choice on my liaison assignment. So I'm really glad to be here. I think this is an important work you do, and it's really well run. After listening to this meeting, I realize I have a lot to learn. So I'm going to try my best to come up to speed, and I hope I can help any way that I can. I just wanted to make one announcement that on Monday night, the select board voted unanimously to enter into a contract with Carrie LaFleur to become our permanent town manager. So that's, yes, so that's going to give some stability to the town, and I'm happy about that. So anyway, I just wanted to say hi. I'll be at your meetings. Thanks.
Great.
And David.
Here for that announcement, Mary.
Yeah.
You've been waiting a while. Finally, Carrie is town manager. To go back to the discussion of fixed component in our rates, underlying there was a question, is this just accounting, or does something actually happen because we make these choices? I think it's helpful to have an example to get to the answer to that question. When fixed charges are collected on a variable basis, for instance, a key element in those fixed charges are the salaries of our fine folks who give us this wonderful light plant. When the fixed component, including those charges, is in the variable, that means when we sell less electricity, oh, we're threatening, we might not be able to pay our people. Guess what? That's not a very good idea. That's a dreadful idea, in fact. we all know that actually we want to sell less electricity. Probably not going to happen because the switch to electricity is the sustainable way forward. But we do not want to have any incentives in our rate structure that make it difficult to decrease sales. In other words, it makes a pivotal difference whether or not we've got the fixed charges accurately into our rates. And that means, as Brian has pointed out, there will not, across the board anyway, be any increase in rates. It just means we will be accurately taking account and having an impact. So did this make a difference? Well, I was there 10 years ago when the failure to have accurate fixed charges in meant it took a year of arguing back and forth, seeming forever, to come up with some policy about solar. We need to get the correct fixed charges, and it has a profound impact. Thanks, Brian.
Right. Thank you, David. Any other comments? It is 9:30. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second? I'm going to go do a roll call because we're on video. Wendy,
Yes.
Gordon,
Yes.
Pam. I'll take that as a question.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. All right. And I agree as well, but I would like to make one final statement to again thank Gordon for his 6 years of work on this board.
Thank you.
And we look forward to what he goes on to next. All right.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.